For a long time, the narrative that this nation was on the brink of global dominance was inescapable. After years of remarkable economic expansion, their financial prowess seemed limitless, funding projects worldwide and seemingly on track to redefine the global power structure. The emergence of modern skyscrapers and the hustle and bustle of expanding urban centers were hailed as the hallmarks of a new global leader. But then the tide turned. This tale might sound familiar with China's recent trajectory, but rewind 30 years, and you'd find Japan at the center of a similar storyline. Japan, too, witnessed a phenomenal economic boom, poised at one point to surpass the United States in economic might. However, its bubble burst, plummeting the country into a period now referred to as the lost decades. The parallels between Japan's past and China's current situation are striking, from their rapid ascents to the challenges they face today, including economic downturns, property market collapses, and demographic dilemmas. While the future remains uncertain and the two countries' circumstances are not identical, Japan's experience may offer clues about what could lie ahead for China, and the outlook is concerning. Japan's rise and fall serve as a cautionary tale. Post-World War II, Japan transformed from a devastated occupied country into a global economic powerhouse within 3 decades, becoming a key player in technology and manufacturing. Initially celebrated as a model of democratic and economic success, Japan's explosive growth soon sparked concern and alarm in the United States, fearing the consequences of its unchecked ascent. In the 1980s, the United States watched in dismay as Japan surpassed them in sectors they once dominated. Japan produced vehicles, electronics, and consumer goods that were not only superior in quality, but also more affordable than American alternatives. Japanese brands were making significant inroads globally, including in the US, where they increasingly overshadowed American products. Japanese corporations, flush with seemingly endless capital, embarked on global spending sprees, particularly in the US, snapping up a wide array of assets from real estate to entertainment companies and manufacturing facilities. This led to fears that Japan might eventually take over the entire US economy, relegating American economic prowess to the shadows. Japan's dominance was attributed to its unique approach to economic development, characterized by a close collaboration between massive corporate conglomerates and the government. These conglomerates, known as keiretsu, consisted of large corporations holding stakes in each other and collaborating closely. Despite being independent entities, they received substantial government support through massive loans, enabling them to undercut market prices on exports, invest heavily abroad, and inflate the Japanese stock and real estate markets. However, by the early 1980s, the unsustainable bubble burst, unveiling the economic miracle's illusion. The collapse of the stock and real estate markets exposed many zombie companies that survived on the influx of cheap capital rather than genuine profitability. This marked the beginning of a prolonged period of economic stagnation, referred to as the lost decades, which had a profound impact on those entering the workforce during this time, leading to the term lost generations. Remarkably, China's story mirrors Japan's in many ways. China, too, enjoyed 3 decades of rapid economic growth, emerging as a key player in manufacturing and successfully launching domestic brands into global markets. Like Japan, China's global investment spree was underpinned by government support. The narrative that China might soon eclipse the United States as the leading global economy was prevalent. However, following 3 decades of unparalleled growth, signs of unraveling have begun to emerge, presenting a scenario strikingly similar to Japan's experience, setting the stage for a comparison that extends beyond mere economic growth to include potential challenges and outcomes. The Japanese economy's prolonged expansion was significantly fueled by an endless influx of government funding. Similarly, China's economic ascendancy over the past 2 decades has been largely driven by massive state investments in infrastructure and real estate. Whenever China faced economic slowdowns, the government's response was to inject more capital into the system, constructing additional highways and buildings. However, this strategy eventually began to lose its effectiveness, and concurrently, China's debt levels surged dramatically. The tightening of debt regulations by the Chinese government led to the collapse of the property market and a noticeable deceleration in economic growth. drawing parallels to Japan's past economic downturn. Yet the question of whether China will follow Japan's path remains open, with the potential for even more dire consequences. There are crucial differences between the two scenarios, most of which disadvantage China. Firstly, Japan was at the pinnacle of development and wealth when its bubble burst in the mid-1990s, boasting a GDP per capita substantially higher than that of the US, and enjoying a high standard of living. This foundational strength has allowed Japan to maintain its position as the world's third largest economy despite economic contractions since the 1990s. In contrast, China is currently at a middle-income stage, with its GDP per capita comparable to Mexico's. A significant economic slowdown now would place China in a far more precarious situation than Japan faced 3 decades ago. Secondly, recent shifts in China's policy indicate a willingness to trade some economic growth for increased ideological conformity and a more assertive foreign policy stance. Actions such as crackdowns on domestic tech and gaming industries targeting foreign businesses and escalating tensions over Taiwan have alarmed international investors, leading to a withdrawal of foreign capital. Although China's dependence on foreign investment has diminished, this retreat is exacerbating economic challenges and introducing additional complexities that Japan did not encounter. Lastly, the demographic challenge presents a critical hurdle. While Japan's struggle with a diminishing and aging population is well documented, indicators suggest that China's demographic predicament could prove even more severe. In contrast to Japan, where population growth decelerated in the 1990s but continued to expand until peaking in 2008 and then began a gradual decline, China's demographic shift is more abrupt. The country hit its population zenith in 2022, with subsequent declines outpacing those observed in any other nation. The latest figures reveal a decline of nearly 3 million people in 2023 alone, accompanied by record low birth and fertility rates, paralleling those of South Korea among the world's lowest. This downward trend is anticipated to accelerate, leading to a rapidly aging and shrinking population, which will exert immense pressure on the pension system, possibly depleting its funds by 2035. The dwindling consumer base and workforce are set to heavily burden the economy, irrespective of other existing challenges. The demographic crisis alone poses a formidable obstacle, but when combined with other prevailing issues, it forms a near-perfect storm. The origins for such abrupt goes back to 1976. Following Mao's death in 1976 and the negative repercussions of both the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, China was determined to shift its focus from ongoing revolutions to fostering stability and economic progress. The Chinese government aimed for a rapid economic boost, aspiring to increase China's per capita GDP from approximately $250 to $1,000 by year 2000. Recognizing the rapidly growing population as a hindrance to these economic goals, the government resolved to implement population control measures. The notorious one-child policy emerged as a strategy to limit the number of children each family could have. The one-child policy was more of a broad directive than a singular statute, initiated by the CCP and executed by local and provincial authorities. A pivotal document marking the commencement of this policy was a letter from the CCP's Central Committee on 25 September 1980, which underscored the urgency of population control to avert imminent economic disaster. Over time, this policy was updated and intensified through various directives, such as Document Number 7 in April 1984 and Document Number 13 in May 1986, although enforcement varied by region. Generally, Chinese families were restricted to one child, with exceptions under specific conditions, including for rural families whose first child was a girl. Methods to manage unauthorized births ranged from widespread contraceptive access to a harsh regime of monetary penalties, compulsory sterilizations, and even abortion and infanticide, all overseen by the expansive network of family planning officials present in every locality. Monetary fines were a primary method of policy enforcement, with penalties for additional children often amounting to several years' worth of a family's income. In Guangdong province, for example, fines for extra births could reach 3 to 6 times the annual household income. Penalties extended beyond just fines. Non-compliance could lead to increased utility bills, withheld grain rations, and revoked licenses, among other sanctions. Government or party employees with unauthorized children faced dismissal, and collective punishment placed immense social pressure on individuals to conform. An illustrative case from September 1987, involved a Chinese couple in the U.S. for training who faced dire threats from their factory's population control office upon learning of their unauthorized pregnancy. The office's letter warned of severe social and financial repercussions, not only for the couple but also for their colleagues, urging them to return to China for an abortion. Such punitive measures served not only as deterrents but also as means to coerce compliance, illustrating the extreme lengths to which the policy was enforced. Imposed strict quotas on family planning workers led to the adoption of coercive tactics. In 1997, reports emerged of family planning workers resorting to arson, targeting homes of families with unauthorized children in rural regions as a scare tactic to enforce compliance with sterilization or abortion mandates. An account from a worker detailed initial shock at witnessing colleagues engage in aggressive actions, including shootings and threats, to enforce policy adherence, underscoring the perceived necessity of such measures due to China's population concerns. Despite the lack of official approval, these extreme methods went largely uninvestigated and unpunished. Another alarming strategy involved the kidnapping of policy violators or their relatives, with detention centers used to exert pressure on individuals to comply with sterilization or abortion requirements. A notable case involved a couple from Hong Kong temporarily residing in Exeong County, who faced threats against a family member as coercion for compliance, leading to the wife's sterilization. Sterilization became a systematic requirement for couples with more than one child, often targeting women. Failure to meet contraception guidelines or IUD check failures resulted in mandatory sterilization, with local family planning workers facing quotas. In instances like missing an IUD checkup meant immediate sterilization. Efforts to meet these quotas included widespread sterilization campaigns, with propaganda and intimidation used to encourage compliance. Despite official claims of voluntary sterilization, the existence of quotas and the scale of operations suggest otherwise. Between 1979 and 1998, an estimated 146 million sterilizations were carried out in China, predominantly affecting women. The practice was so widespread that by 2000, a significant portion of Chinese women of childbearing age had been sterilized, raising concerns about the voluntary nature of these procedures. Comparisons to historical eugenics programs highlight the scale and impact of China's sterilization efforts, challenging official narratives of voluntary participation. Amid the enforcement of the one-child policy, not all pregnancies were prevented by contraception and sterilization, necessitating abortion as a subsequent measure. China, under this policy, adopted one of the world's most lenient stances on abortion, permitting the procedure up to 24 weeks, a duration twice as long as the limit established in the Roe v. Wade case in the United States. The stance on abortion varies widely, with opinions divided on its equivalence to infanticide. Regardless of one's perspective on abortion, it is clear that within the context of China's policy, the emphasis was less on women's autonomy and more on controlling population numbers. For instance, a 1987 directive from High Province mandated a 90% abortion rate for pregnancies that were not authorized, turning fines for exceeding birth quotas into indirect compulsion for abortion. This coercion extended to workplaces, where employers would pressure employees to terminate unauthorized pregnancies, sometimes resulting in involuntary procedures. One harrowing instance from 2012 involved a woman from Shaanxi who was forcibly subjected to an abortion at 7 months pregnant due to her inability to pay the fine for a second child. Her case, which drew international condemnation, exemplifies the extreme measures taken against millions of women, coerced into abortions they did not consent to. Moreover, the policy led to a significant number of sex-selective abortions, as a preference for male offspring, particularly in rural areas, contributed to a substantial gender imbalance within the population. Despite measures to curb sex selective practices, the impact on China's demographic structure was profound. Beyond abortion, the policy also cast a shadow over the dark practice of infanticide, particularly against female infants, exacerbating gender disparities. Historical declines in sex selective infanticide were reversed following the policy's implementation, with estimations suggesting the absence of up to 50 million girls from population records, a gap partially attributed to both abandonment and deliberate neglect. This neglect often manifested in a lack of medical intervention for sick female infants, highlighting a stark disparity in the value placed on male versus female lives. Tragic narratives have surfaced, illustrating the brutal reality faced by families with unauthorized pregnancies. In one account from 1981, a woman was coerced into an abortion which tragically failed, resulting in the live birth of her son, who was then forcibly euthanized by hospital staff. Another devastating story from 2002 involves husband whose wife, during labor without a birth permit, was subjected to horrific measures by hospital and family planning officials, leading to the death of their newborn. These accounts, among others, underscore the severe human rights violations and emotional trauma inflicted under the guise of population control, leaving indelible marks on countless families and the societal fabric of China. Husband faced reprimand for his outcry during the tragic event and was coldly advised against any further outbursts. The medical professionals involved expressed no empathy, clarifying their obligation to adhere to directives from the Family Planning Commission, highlighting the systemic nature of these practices. The one-child policy, conceived to curb China's population growth and stimulate economic progress, did not meet its initial population targets by 2000. While some argue the policy averted a population increase of up to 400 million, this figure is contested. Critics and scholars alike note that China's fertility rates were already on a decline in the 1970s due to pre-existing trends and suggest that natural economic development would have continued to reduce birth rates as observed in other developed nations. Despite China's significant GDP growth, consensus among experts suggests the one-child policy may have been an unnecessary, if not detrimental, approach to achieving such economic advancements. The policy also had profound social implications, notably exacerbating a gender imbalance that has left countless men without prospects for marriage and altering traditional family dynamics. While surviving daughters often benefited from improved access to education and economic opportunities, this is scant consolation, considering the estimated 50 million girls missing due to the policy's enforcement. Public sentiment towards the policy was largely negative, with a significant majority of both urban and rural couples expressing a desire for more than one child in a 1988 poll. Despite the prevailing societal pressure to conform to governmental directives and the potential risks of dissent, critics of the policy argue that its inherent ethical violations, including the infringement on personal freedoms, forced sterilizations, coerced abortions, and instances of infanticide, cannot be justified by economic growth or demographic management objectives. This perspective views the policy's fundamental principles as morally indefensible, irrespective of its outcomes. Nonetheless, the policy's implementation saw millions subjected to abortions and sterilizations, often under the threat of punitive measures, underscoring the coercive nature of its enforcement. Despite these controversies, international recognition was given to the architect of the one-child policy, who was awarded the United Nations Population Award in 1983 for his contributions, highlighting the complex and polarized views on China's approach to population control. Despite these self-produced challenges, it is essential to acknowledge that China's economy is still expanding at a respectable rate, around 5% annually, which, though slower than its historical rates, remains above the global average. This suggests that while China may not experience the same level of stagnation as Japan, its economic growth is expected to decelerate further in the coming years. The decline might not be as abrupt as Japan's, unfolding more gradually yet given China's circumstances. Even a modest slowdown could have significant implications. Looking ahead, it is conceivable that in 30 years, the perception of China as the imminent global superpower might be reconsidered in light of these unfolding realities. Thank you so much for watching. If you found value in our video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the like button. It really supports our channel. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our future videos. We love hearing from you, so please leave a comment below with your thoughts or any questions you might have. Your feedback helps us create better content for you. Until next time, stay curious and connected.